Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, we can hear you, Seth. All right, good.
Ooh.
And can we go for the trifecta? Ian, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, look at that. That's great. No, this is like loaded with bad omens. And on the one hand, like, look, it's very on brand for us to always start the space complaining about Twitter Spaces. But I started the space and the app immediately crashed. And I'm like, oh God, like it literally lasted not a second. So I mean, for the first time, I had to reconnect to the space before I could even make you a co-host. And then I go to like start Twitter again, and it's doing one of these things. May I complain about something for a moment?
Oh,
Wait, please.
Fine, if you must.
Right. This whole like, oh, we've added this new feature that we want to explain to you right now, and then you got like, got it. I gotta like click on got it. It's like you got me to like I don't get it. No, I don't have it right now because I'm not bothering to read this right now because your app has crashed. I need to restart it. I'm not interested in your new feature right now. Twitter, not now.
You sound like you're 1,000 years old.
Do I sound like I'm 1,000 years old?
Yeah.
It's also so odd to hear you complain about something. I feel like this is a first for me.
Okay, look.
Starting off with a bang.
Take a look. All right. Well, then let me stop complaining about the price of toothpaste and inflation, and instead welcome Seth and Ian. So I'm super excited to have you both. So Adam, did you? I don't know if you had seen Seth's piece. I'm not sure if you'd.
No, I hadn't.
But I mean, I loved this piece. So, I mean, first of all, just to I mean, we're a private company. I feel like no disclosures are actually required, but just in the interest of full transparency, Seth, you and Eclipse obviously are we're the lead on our seed and have been investors in Oxide, huge believers in Oxide. So, on the one hand, we are entirely biased, because obviously you are terrific venture capitalists. You have exquisite taste in companies, clearly. But on the other hand, I think that Ian is not an investor in Oxide, and Ian.
I can say whatever I want.
Exactly. You can say whatever you want. It's like, Ian's like, no, I'm here to explain why I passed on your company and why I saw countless red flags when. I think that, there's a reason why Eclipse is an investor in Oxide, because I think one of the things, one of the myths that entrepreneurs are told is that when you are raising, you're raising from VCs and you're going to go out to Sand Hill and you want to, kind of keep everyone in this moving at the same pace in your process. And it totally factors out the fact that's like, actually, some investors are going to be more interested in you than others. And the investors that are interested are going to move much faster than the investors that are disinterested. And because there are going to be investors that have been kind of waiting for a company like yours or for whom you hit the thesis. And I think it's fair to say that that's true of Eclipse and Oxide. Certainly when we came to you, it felt like someone let oxygen into the room. It's like we were finally talking to a venture capitalist who really understood hard tech. So I was really happy to see this blog entry. I think it's a terrific blog entry. And there are a bunch of things that I like about it. One of them that I liked about it actually is that you sent me to Ian's blog entry, which I also really, really love. And before we get into it, Seth, just one thing I want to hit off the jump that I love is that because I think that Steve's here and can obviously can speak for himself in this regard, but I feel that first of all, and Adam, you were an entrepreneur. Did you know you wanted to start a company before you knew what you wanted to do? I think that's like common, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think. Well, I mean, I think they were very much intertwined. I think I knew I wanted to start a company if I figured out what I wanted to do.
Totally.
I think there are those entrepreneurs who I've met plenty of folks who want to be at the head of the line, want to start a company, kind of irrespective of what it is. Right. And that was definitely not
right. And I think that Steve and I knew we wanted to start a company together, but didn't know what we wanted to go do. And I don't think that this is that uncommon, where it's like, I know like who I want to do it with, or I think the time is right in my life, or this is what I want to go do. But I'm kind of like looking, I'm trying to think about ideas. And, Steve and I were really, Steve, I hope that neither of us will ever say aloud some of the dumbass ideas that we had when they were not hard tech ideas. They were
not. They were embarrassingly off thesis ideas. But I think in our case, it was like, no, we want to start a company, do it together, and the kind of company that we wanted to build that did not necessitate the explicit product that company was going to go make. And to your point, thank God we did not move forward with any of those early ideas.
But I think though, and I just interject here,
Yeah.
like, and you talked about this recently on a podcast, right? There was a moment where somebody, he who shall not be named, freed you guys up in your creative process to like dream big.
That's exactly it.
Say like, hey, if capital isn't an issue, or we could remove interest from an investor or a set of investors off the table, what should we go build?
Yes.
And I feel like that was a useful exercise for you guys to go pencil in on, what then became Oxide, but more importantly, what kicked off as like, hey, this is something of significance, right? That's what I'm trying to speak to and kind of pay homage to in this, from this talk from Richard Hammy, is like, people should work on the hard things because the hard things are meaningful and important and inspire others to come along on the journey. And ultimately, if you work on those things, and whether or not you're successful or not, those are the things that you look back on as being, the singular moments or singular, period in your life that you're most proud of. And, that's, correct if I'm wrong, that's kind of like where you guys were at when you said, shit, should we go do this wild, crazy thing that then has now become Oxide Computer Company?
Totally. And part of it, Seth, what I love about your blog entry is it says exactly that, that like you, prospective entrepreneur, don't be afraid to dream big. Don't be afraid to take on the hard problems. And what would you do? And I remember, and I don't even know. Actually, I do know, unfortunately, because I looked it up. I thought, Adam, do you have this thing where like you think you take a single person and kind of every piece of like aphorism you attribute to that person? Do you have this? My
No, like
Ben Franklin.
Or
It's Ben Franklin, Mark Twain, and Eleanor Roosevelt. Isn't that like the trifecta of like? And so, in particular, like, what would you do if you were unafraid of failing? Which I thought was Eleanor Roosevelt. As it turns out, it was a televangelist who said that. So it's like, I like going deep into his Wikipedia page to see if this guy got caught up in any scandal before, like, am I like even allowed to hold on to this idea? But I do think it's really useful. And Seth, kind of like, I feel like part of your blog entry, part of the emotional tone of it is, what is the hard problem that you would solve if you were unafraid of your ability to raise? Like, let's assume you could raise capital. What hard problem would you go solve? And that is super liberating. But, and this is where I want to get into kind of the meat of your piece. It doesn't mean that like every hard problem is a venture business. And, there are certain kinds of hard problems that are going to be, so maybe this is, I love your obviously peer quote, Seth. So I don't know if we want to kind of start there as the important rubric that you use when looking at hard tech.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, typically, and Ian, I'll give a shout out to Ian. One of the reasons why, I love Ian is because, we've been kind of on this lonely island for a decade or more at this point, investing in this type of companies, sometimes together, sometimes not. But I think, our Cantos and Eclipse are brother and sister companies, so to speak.
Very true.
But, it's not to say that like the companies, these hard tech companies, aren't going to require significant amounts of capital. In fact, I think most companies, to get to a place where they really are breakout and have significant scale and have the ability to be a generational company, do require hundreds of millions of dollars of capital. And so like, people shouldn't be afraid of that. What I think we're trying to get to with the crux of this piece is like, hey, how do we go shed some light on, the non-commercial SaaS metrics, oriented companies, and give kind of a better framework for how do you create inflection points of value through the early stages of development of some of these more challenging, full stack oriented technical solutions, so that you have focus, clarity of focus. You can orient the resources that you have in the balance sheet as efficiently as possible to hit those next inflection points. And, oftentimes that endeavor, that journey starts off with a keen understanding of like, hey, this is a big problem, but it's also an unbelievable market opportunity, right? There are a broad swath of customers that if I solve this problem for them are willing to pay me a premium for the solution that I'm providing. And so, when I talk about, Pierre and like the way he's pounded many lessons into me over the years, this is a key one. It's right. It's like, and it seems obvious in retrospect, but like most companies don't do this. It's like, hey, go solve a problem that somebody wants to pay you for the solution.
Yeah. Well, that sounds novel.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
It sounds novel, but it sort of is. I mean, we're making fun of it, but what I tried to do in my financial argument for deep tech piece was articulate sort of how we invest at Cantos today, which is really an attempt. Maybe I should give a little background. I didn't have like a hardware background like Seth. He was coming from GE to GE Ventures to Eclipse. I came at deep tech from fintech. I was an early employee at SoFi and have always just been fascinated with how we solve big problems as a species and sci-fi, like cutting edge tech. And over time, I sort of had a greater onus to justify moving from investing originally in fintech and sort of SaaS, where I was making angel investments, and where we were a little more broad when I got Cantos off the ground 6 years ago, and was sort of like one by one dispelling these like myths about deep tech. I mean, I didn't know that much about investing, so I was just listening to other well-known investors, and they were all saying things like, hardware is hard, it's riskier, longer timelines, longer sales cycles, it's going to take a lot more capital, the upside maybe isn't as big. And I was like, oh yeah, taking notes. You're a really good investor. You must be right about all these things. So I'm going to, not invest in hardware. And then I was like, well, wait a second. If all of you are like categorically saying you're not investing in these areas and there's any opportunity to be had there, then maybe it's a differentiated approach to investing, and in fact there can be more return on investment. And I think all those are myths, but approached in a certain way. So what I came to understand that led a lot of VCs to not be investing in hardware and bio was that for 20 years the asset class has been punch drunk on software, which is really amazing in a lot of ways. I mean, it can scale fast, really high gross margins. You can build strong network effects such that you have enduring moats. Like there's a reason why it attracted so much capital. But venture capital got started investing in hardware and then sort of took a detour through software for so long that people forgot how to do hardware because all those people are retired. And so we're sort of rediscovering it. And that pendulum swinging was once described in an interview with Tom Perkins, where he said, look, throughout the history of funding technology, you sort of have this pendulum swinging between predominantly taking market risk and predominantly taking technical risk. Well, with things like developer tools, cloud computing, it became so easy to build software that the question for most startups wasn't, can you build the product? It was, does anybody want this?
Yeah.
And so Sandhill Road for 20 years optimized around taking predominantly market risk and almost no technical risk. Deep tech, I think, because you are taking a lot more technical risk, the more responsible way to approach it is to attempt to invest in companies where you are minimizing market risk to offset that technical risk. You can definitely take both, but I think what Seth sort of described there, he like glossed over, I think, a lot of assumptions that get made today. But anyway,
well, totally. And I think actually technical risk is so foreign to most venture that they don't actually even understand where it exists. I mean, one of the things that was frustrating to us when we were initially raising is people didn't think that there was any technical risk in Oxide. And I'm like, am I not explaining this properly? I mean, and on the one hand, if a VC says, oh, there's no technical risk, you don't be like, hey, let me stop you right there, pal. There is unbounded technical risk in this thing. I mean, you don't want to be like, let me give you many more reasons to be concerned. But the reality was there was enormous technical risk in Oxide. And so I think, Ian, I think you're right. I think that they're so unaccustomed to technical risk. I mean, on the bio side, Silicon Valley understands technical risk. But I think on the kind of the old school technical side,
well, more like Cambridge.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Easy for me to say because I'm not raising around as a bio company, but they do not understand technical risk, and it is really frustrating, especially because, and I also like, hardware is hard. It's like, can we stop saying that, please? I mean, yes, on the one hand, hardware is hard. Software is hard too. Also, is software soft? I mean, that's also true, I guess. But like this kind of like this parroting back of hardware is hard, because the other thing that has happened is hardware is easier than it has ever been.
Absolutely. And this is the thing I think that like was the key insight. One of the insights upon which Eclipse was founded is like, it's easier and more capital efficient to build these full stack hardware software companies than it ever has been in human history.
Yes.
You get excited about off the shelf component performance to cost inverse correlation is unbelievable, right? You look at the drop in cost of every single off the shelf sensor, compute architecture that you ever wanted to use in an integrated system, the rapid prototyping tools.
Totally.
The ability to leverage open source software,
3D printing,
the reality of like CMs coming down stack to like work with earlier stage companies. Like it's easy. It's still not easy, right? But building anything in consequence is
right, exactly.
So, and the other thing I think is like is ridiculous is like to say that these are just hardware companies and just companies are like one-time widget sales for 20% gross margin is an absolute misnomer as well. I mean, what an insult to Sean at Oxide, who's building some of the best software for this industry, or along with a team, and building some of the best software for this industry that we've seen in the last 10 years, right? So these two kind of like areas of the stack need to work in harmony to deliver value to the end customer, right? And when you get it right, you have more control over the development cycle. You have a greater ability to provide value to that customer. And ultimately, you've got more defensibility around your business model than if you were just slicing off a piece of the stack.
Totally. And Seth, it was so funny because I remember, and Steve, I know you remember this incredibly vividly as well. I mean, I know exactly where I was when we were first presenting to Eclipse, and we are kind of starting to make this case. And you and the partners at Eclipse are like interrupting us to like finish the sentence. And I just remember the line that I think it was Greg had. Someone has like, yeah, we've looked at the 18 of the 20 largest companies ever built have had a hardware and a software component. Like, this is not.
I mean, the thing that we talk about, right? It's like 75% of global GDP exists in the physical world industries. How are you going to touch those without a physical layer? Right? How are you going to really get into the bowels of supply chain and manufacturing and next generation compute and better medical devices, all this kind of stuff without, cinching your belt tight and figuring out how to navigate hardware design cycles and procurement and supply chain and manufacturing.
Right. And these are all.
It drives me
also remember
nuts.
vividly that we left that meeting saying, thank God we just found our people. And also we need to get that slide.
Yeah.
That's those 18 to 25 companies.
I mean, it drives me crazy that all the funds that say, we don't invest in hardware. Hardware's hard. We don't do that. They're like, all the quotes on their website are from Steve Jobs.
Oh, thank you, Ian. Thank you, Ian.
It's nuts.
Oh,
it's time to build.
It's time to build. It's a moonshot. It's a moonshot. Really, it's a moonshot. Okay, can we have like an Apollo program historical review, please? I mean, I know, I love it. It's like you and I almost feel like you may, if you are not going to fund hardware, you may never quote Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. I'm sorry. I mean, it's like I don't make up the rules. These are the new VC rules. And as long as I'm on this particular rant, software's eating the world. The software companies that are held up as this is the future. Adam, I know you. Adam, do you know the companies that are in that essay? If you read to the bottom of that essay.
Oh, I remember it's like Groupon or something. Like
yeah, it's Groupon, it's Foursquare, and I mean it's these companies. It's Zynga. And it's like.
It's like all companies you're needing to look up on Wikipedia to remember.
Totally. And not that they didn't build big businesses and not that they weren't important or what have you, but it's hard to argue that you've built things that are really lasting. And obviously software is incredibly important, but it's incredibly important, Seth, as you say, it's incredibly important when you made it with the physical world. And it just feels and Ian, I think you did a very good job of because it is super frustrating to us. It's obviously frustrating to you as well. Although actually, I guess it sounds, like it's not frustrating. It's like, no, it's not frustrating to me at all because I get to go into this. It's great to me that no one else is willing to invest because I'm able to come in. It's like, I don't have to compete with all these folks. But you highlighted a couple of things that I thought were really interesting about I think you had 4 factors. Do you want to elaborate on those a little bit? Because I thought that was really interesting in terms of like why it is so important, and also kind of explaining also why effectively Sandhill is not investing in hard tech.
Yeah, and I do. I mean, to be clear, I do need other people to be invested in companies. You know, we haven't announced it yet, but we're investing out of our third fund, which is 50 million. So like we need someone else to do the Series A and B and C. So I desperately want more people to be investing in this. And besides, you know, it's good for the world. And so okay, to the 4 points. You mean in the
yeah, your 4 arguments, because all of those really resonated with me. Or I should say 3 of the 4. But I'll let you elaborate, and then we can talk about
them. As to like why it's an opportunity, one is what I got at earlier, which is that Sandhill Road sort of has a blind spot here, just because they've been specializing around software for so long. The craft of mastering technical risk rather than market risk is like sort of been lost. The next I think was diversification, like and by that I mean not just within your portfolio, but if you look through to the end customers, a lot of software looks a heck of a lot like a house of cards built on venture dollars. And if you have a contraction like you did in early 2000 or in the past 6 months in software, then it all sort of like cascades, because there's a correction in e-com, and then all the e-com startups are correcting, and then their cloud providers are correcting. It just all sort of cascades. Whereas in hard tech, a lot of times, and maybe this isn't as applicable to Oxide, though you will serve industrial customers, not just information technology. Our portfolio, they serve deep tech, quote unquote, is thought of as a specialty, but like I don't feel like that, because at any given moment I'm looking into how we make cement or steel, or how you generate power for commercial real estate or mining, or it's like all these different areas. And so your end customer diversification is a real
and I love the fact that you are like, you have a tweet from like January something, I can't remember the exact date, but you're like, look, I'm not saying it is April of 2000, but what if it is? Like, what if this is the top? And I'm like looking back and I'm like, wait a minute, was that the top? Did you actually call the top? I think you might have. I think you were very prescient.
Things have started going sideways in I think mid-November. Keith Raboy probably called the top, as much as I hate to.
There you go. But very important. You got diversification, super important. Then you've got a third factor that really resonates with Oxide.
I think I refer to this as talent arbitrage. Like, I haven't run the numbers on pay differences, but or tenure or ease of recruiting, any of those metrics. But it certainly feels in our portfolio like they have an easier time recruiting talent, because you're some combination of working on more interesting technical problems, which engineers tend to prefer spending their time on, and a let's call it world positive mission, that if it's doing something really cool that is better for the world versus like, I don't know, just another SaaS company, then the cool company tends to win that talent.
Yeah.
and sometimes can even pay less.
And I think that, not so much on the pay less front, but more on the we talked about our compensation model a lot, and we want to make sure that people are compensated fairly and uniformly. And at Oxide, we've got to obviously gone into that a lot. But what we have found at Oxide is that the talent that we've been, we're unusual, I guess, if you compare certainly to SaaS companies, and that we're very oversubscribed. We got a lot more people. The hardest thing about Oxide has been that we've got more people who want to work at Oxide, who would succeed at Oxide, than we can possibly accommodate. And that's not common for startups writ large, but I don't think it's as uncommon for hard tech startups. I think that hard tech startups, you can really make a pitch. And also, I think the kind of technologist you're attracting is someone who's seasoned. It's someone who has got, who's done certain of these things before. Seth, does that hold true do you see that across your portfolio? Not to say that it's easy to hire, of course. But...
Yeah, in this like framework that we put out, some of these less quantitative things, we talk about, cultural mission, the mission of the organization and the cultural competitive advantage began to take shape. I think that like you have to be super intentional and thoughtful about how you set that up from the beginning. But if 2-ish years into the journey, you've got a very clearly articulated mission that inspires, that the intention behind that mission is to go solve a big problem. It's categorically can be defined as like a lucrative market opportunity, and it's one that attracts people that want to come there and do the best work of their career with other like-minded, intentional, values-oriented folks.
Yeah.
You can begin to build a foundation that creates a huge tailwind for hiring through the next few stages of the business, right? And you can say, hey, look, come here and be a part of this journey. Come here and be a part of this A team. And you begin to start punching above your weight class with regard to the executives and the technical and commercial and operations talent you're able to bring on board. And it creates this kind of organizational momentum that can help you get through some of the more challenging times.
Totally. And I think that, the famous, Steve Jobs landing John Scully at Apple, like, do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your career?
Amen.
And it's like,
Amen.
and sugar water right now, it's SaaS, crypto, like that is the sugar water that we have now.
You wanna optimize ad clicks or like get dog walkers more efficiently to your house? Like go for it. You want to like solve modern day supply chain crises that we're seeing play out in front of us right now? Like come join us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, you look, and I also feel it's like, you've got kind of the right firm that you're talking to when you're looking across a portfolio. It's certainly true for Eclipse and Cantos, where you look across the portfolio and you're like, wow, I think I want to go like talk to these companies. Like these companies are all, if I, obviously I'm not looking for a job, but if I were, like, I would actually start by going to some of these hard tech VC firms and walking the portfolio, because the portfolio is really exciting and uplifting.
But I think what's lost in that, or not lost, but what you need to mention, right, is like you got to build a great business too, right? And so, like it turns out some of these ad click businesses, or like it turns out some of the SaaS businesses, these are great businesses, right? There's a phenomenal business out there. So we in many ways have, we got to not get on our soapbox too much. We need to go out and build a great, enduring, business model with strong unit economics and strong expansion within customers, and the ability to reduce the cost over time. Wink, wink, nod, nod.
Wait a minute, are we in a board meeting? This is if Pierre shows up here, I'm going to be very upset.
I know. But like these types of things, and so the great thing about it is like that's not there is a playbook, there's a set of methodologies that you can run that enables you to build that type of business. And while the last 20 years of venture may have gotten too addicted to the application layer, the software application layer, there's 50-60 years of execution in early stage and early stage startups and early stage venture that gives us great examples historically of how to go do this effectively. And so that's one of the privileges of my career is to work with a guy like Pierre, but also my partner Greg Ryko, and kind of like I love that late 1980s, early 90s semiconductor networking, those types of companies, because man, they were just ruthless in their execution, and along the way built wonderful business models.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, so to someone just starting out who's like, I've got the ability to solve a hard tech problem, I'm interested in this, what guidance do you give about like how, and I think that this is the Pierre quote, right, of markets. I mean, would that be the guidance that you would give to a would-be entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to start by like what's similar to what you guys did, right? Like if we could do anything, what would we go work on, right? And then once you've kind of like centered in on, hey, this is something that we can build. It's not research oriented, or we have a little bit more of a bias towards engineering execution versus research execution. I'm happy to go into kind of how we think about that. But once you say like, hey, this is something that we could build, then you want to lean into the market. You want to go talk to customers. Like, hey, is this a problem for you today? How acute is that problem? How many customers out there are experiencing that problem? If I were to solve that problem with a solution that looks like X, Y, Z, what might you be willing to pay for that? And so through that exploration, you can start to do the deep work on the market side to understand kind of that MRD to PRD process, right? That market requirements to product requirements process. That's exactly what you guys did, right? And now you guys also have the the experience of 20 years building in this category, right? But if you guys were fresh off the boat, right, you probably start with a similar kind of design council oriented methodology that you
Yeah,
did.
but one of the things that was really frustrating to us, and frankly, is still frustrating to us, that I don't quite get, because we obviously totally believe in your emphasis on the markets, peers, markets. We know that we're tacking towards a huge market, and the number of VCs that we've encountered, they're like, I don't think that market exists, and you're like, what? And I think it's because it actually was funny because we had one VC, very famous VC, call us. That felt like an unbelievable long shot for Oxide, and he called us somewhat early. He's like, "Hey, look, I want to talk to your customers, because we're interested." And I'm like, "You guys are such a long shot." And ultimately they didn't get over the line, so we were right on that. But I'm like, look, our customers are, kind of, we don't want to have 20 VCs talking to them. So if that's like your last hurdle, fine. Otherwise, and he like kind of cut me off. He's obviously a great venture capitalist. He's like, no, you're right. You know what? I shouldn't have even asked. You're totally right. I will go do my own research. Something, Seth, I have to say that you do, and Ian, I'm going to presume that you do, and this venture capitalist does, but these are not words that come out of a venture capitalist's mouth that frequently, unfortunately. Maybe am I being overly cynical, Ian? Maybe I'm being too cynical.
No, I think you're right.
I don't know. I don't want to bash too much.
I know.
On my fellow venture folks out there,
I know.
I'm certainly not perfect.
Okay,
either.
listen, I know you both need follow-on capital. You both need syndicates, so you don't need to say it. Listen, for the record, Ian and Seth hold all of their colleagues in the highest possible esteem, and they know that every venture capitalist does all of the homework that they should do. From our experience as entrepreneurs, exactly. Our experience as entrepreneurs, often VCs don't do their homework, but this one did. He's like, I'm going to do my homework. And then he came back and, came back a week later. He's like, wow, got total conviction on the market. Boy, jeez, wow, big market. Like, okay, this is great. But the number of folks that we saw, and I think, Ian, it goes to a point that you made about this is not something that Sandhill's investing in. There's a certain like self-fulfilling prophecy where because Sandhill is not investing in it, people are like, if this is such a big market, why is no one investing in it? And it's like, no, but is that an opportunity? Wait a minute, what? And Steph, I know you see that in a bunch of your big industrial markets where it's like there aren't necessarily VC funded companies in those markets, but there probably should be.
Yeah, I mean, listen, what you guys are doing, what other companies in our portfolio are doing is hard. Like, let's not get it twisted. It's not an easy path. And I've had a front row seat to the last 3 years for you guys and many other companies in our portfolio, and it's just not easy. That doesn't mean it's not possible. And so what you have to get comfortable with is like, hey, how do I structure a development plan that's focused on very, very critical critical feedback that we've gleaned from the market that says, hey, if we get through this, as efficiently as possible, there is an awesome opportunity on the other side. And then you get to work, right? You bring on, the folks, similar to the high quality folks that you brought on, and you endeavor to persevere through all of these really hard challenges to get to that place. And, we might be plus or minus off by a few quarters, but if we've structured the capitalization, in the right way, we're going to get there, right? And so part of what it means to be an early stage investor in these types of companies is to like make the investment, get on the same side of the table, and operate with the utmost conviction, knowing full well that there's going to be headwinds along the way.
Totally. So great to get Adam in here. So for those who don't know, Adam Jacob, founder of Chef, current founder of the System Initiative. I mean, Adam, you've been on obviously the entrepreneur side of the table. You've raised a ton of capital for infrastructural software, kind of increasingly hard tech. I mean, what have you seen out there, and what's your perspective on hard tech VC?
Well, I was actually mostly just thinking about your comment that you had so many folks who were like, if there's such a big market here, like, why isn't there more investment in it, or why isn't there kind of more of that stuff happening? And like, I really think that it's a little bit because people are just really bad at asking questions about what people want. Like, if you think about taking something like Oxide and you go ask, someone in the Fortune 500 if what they want is a rack scale computer that deploys fast, they say no. right? But if you ask them, do you want your data center to operate like a public cloud? They say yes.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And how do you? So I mean, obviously, people are bad at asking these questions. So, but presumably, you mean both entrepreneurs and investors that are not asking necessarily the right questions.
I mean, sort of, but investors usually are worse than entrepreneurs, right? Because
I'm obviously
I say that with so much love in my heart for all of my investors and so many others. But like, because you're not your job is to gain conviction, inside of what an entrepreneur sees. So, an entrepreneur sees the opportunity, they see the market, they see those things. Investors need to then gain conviction in those things, get on the same side of the table, I think, as Seth said, and then, push toward that conviction. And I think anytime what you're building is hard tech, whether it's hardware or software, if it's actually new and it's actually different and it's therefore also has the potential to be massive, not that it has to be those things to be massive. It doesn't, right? You can sometimes figure out how to do something just better than something did it before, right? But like, then ultimately that process of getting to that conviction usually can't happen by going and asking the prospective customer, whether or not they want it, because they don't know if they want it because it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so like you have to gain that conviction because you gain enough expertise about what it is, what the actual problems are that people are experiencing. What is the suffering that exists inside of the Fortune 3, the Global 3000 that sucks about running their data centers? And the number of investors who are in data centers in the Global 3000 talking to people who run them or build them or manage them is pretty small. And yet, like, we ask them to judge whether or not these markets are big enough. And that's why, like, it's kind of amazing that venture capital exists at all. But like, it's amazing that you can find people who are willing to sort of jump off that metaphorical cliff with you.
Well, like, conviction can't be built in 48 hours by chasing growth metrics, right? Conviction is built from like digging in deeply and experiencing the problem firsthand. And so, I don't think it's fair to the venture asset class or the venture capital asset class to frame venture capital and its execution in the last 20 years, because historically institutional venture capital was a couple of bets per year, right? A couple investments per year, high conviction, high ownership, join the boards early and help shape the pathway to success, because those institutions had a thesis about the problem that these founders were going out to solve, right? And so very much it was like, hey, a meeting of the minds, right? In the moment of that pitch, like, oh yeah, I get it. I worked on this problem too, or I've seen this experience in other companies or whatever it was. And so, we got so caught up in the last few years of this cycle, and we tried to squeeze so much juice out so quickly that, frankly, I think a lot of venture capital firms forgot that diligence is a prerequisite.
Oh, yeah, I think that's super true. And I think, but and anytime you have the luxury as an entrepreneur of choice about whose money you should take, like, my advice is consistently, like, go with thesis. Like, you need to find people whose thesis for the fund and whose thesis for everything aligns with the thesis of what it is you're trying to build, and they want to build that thesis with you. Because if you mess it up, like, you need somebody who, like, believes that thesis should come true. That's what gets you through the flat spots and the weird bits, is that you're like, yeah, no, we all agree this should exist, right? And like, let's go make it exist.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of interesting things to go pull on there. I mean, Seth, one thing you mentioned is diligence, and kind of the nature of raising is that VCs don't necessarily see the questions that other VCs are asking, or that's how it feels. Maybe this isn't true, but there is to me, shocking disparity in the quality of questions that are asked. And, you kind of know when, and I mean, obviously, Steve, you and I have seen this any number of times when, like the kind of with those first questions, you kind of know, like, okay, this is going to be a thoughtful process. This is not going to be a thoughtful process. And certainly when we hit Eclipse and the diligence that, I mean, you Eclipse are doing, but you personally were doing, I mean, you were immediately asking all of the right questions about the market and digging in all of the right ways. And I I don't know, like, how do we get better? Like, how does one learn how to do diligence? Because I feel like the feedback that you get on the investment cycle is so long. I mean, is there any way we can help? Seth, are you going to have like diligence school that you can have?
I don't
At
know.
a diligence camp?
I learned a lot from Ian, right? Like Ian is one
Hmm.
of the more thesis-driven investors. I mean, he's been looking at the nuclear space. Ian, jump in here for years, right? And all of a sudden, it's a little bit in vogue. And so when I caught up finally to his thesis, he had pages and pages that he and I think one of his partners had put together. And so
My analyst
part of
Andrew
it's
is
like,
listening on.
yeah,
And
yeah,
shout out
Andrew
Andrew.
Kirmer put together wonderful work there, right? That I was able to kind of learn from. And so I think there are no shortcuts, right? You have to be trying to chew on a problem for some time to really be in a position where you can sit down with an entrepreneur who has gone all in, who's like burnt the lifeboats behind him, had the conversation with the spouse, said, we're going to go do this, and feel like you can actually have an intelligent conversation. And that's why like the last few years of this like no diligence effort, it's just kind of like, it's a fluke, right? It's a signal of the peak.
Yeah, I appreciate your words of solace, Seth. You're saying that like this will get that I should just like settle down, and that what we've seen in the last couple of years is an aberration, and that diligent VC will return in the coming years.
Ian,
I'm looking, that's what I choose to believe.
I'm trying to decide which I like more. I rather like the time when people were just throwing around money with no diligence.
and asking questions like, hey, when you're raising your seed, could you raise less money and just build one rack? Which was a legitimate question.
Oh my God.
To which we obviously had to say, like, well, by the way, like the first rack is nearly all the cost.
Mm-hmm.
Getting to that first rack, but yeah, I don't know if maybe it will just improve with time. But
okay, so here's I want to be, I like to, one of my principles is assume good intent, assume people aren't totally stupid, but whether or not that may be the case, I like to live my life that way. So let's give a little credit to these thank you, to the sort of high velocity investors. The way I see it is that it was possible to do very quick diligence on, let's say, SaaS companies, fintech, consumer companies, where there are metrics to look at, and you can sort of like plug in some variables and output evaluation, and your conviction was a bit more algorithmic or deterministic. And I think that is actually what happened to a lot of these firms. It's what's your ARR, what's your growth rate, what's your retention look like, and ascribe some multiple to your ARR run rate based on that. That is harder to do when, let's say, you're predominantly taking technical risk and there's a few years of building before you go to market. There's no equation, like there's no variables to plug into your equation. You have to do more diligence because you got to really understand what you're getting yourself into.
Ian, I'm glad you mentioned that, because this brings us to a graph that I love that you did. And Seth, you obviously loved it too, because you quoted it in your blog entry. Yeah, totally. Where you have and we'll certainly get the graph up there in the notes, but this is like, I don't know if you saw this in Seth's blog entry. This is like revenue 0 for the amount of time you're taking on that technical risk, and then the revenue shoots up when you bring this thing to market. So Ian, I think that just as you say, it's like you don't have this like, oh, we have like 4 people and now we have 6 people each paying $1.99 a month. It's like no, that's not the model for hard tech. It's going to look different from that.
I mean, I'll add one more like minor defense of the like fast capital deployment venture capitalists. I didn't have a ton of meetings with them, but I have had a few, and at least one of them I felt like was as clear about their conviction as any like high diligence conviction investor I've ever seen. Like 5 minutes in the meeting, he was like, "Look, here's the deal. I've got money, and I've got like a fuckload of it. And what I do is I give you money, and if it wins, I give you more." And if it goes wrong,
Adam, I'm going to hit you up later for an intro if you don't mind.
And then they were like, and then if it doesn't work out, I don't. And what you don't do is call me. Like if it works, more money comes. If it doesn't work, don't call me. If you need help figuring out what to do, or you need somebody to sit on your side of the table or whatever, I'm not your guy. I'm the money guy. And
And
Adam,
Adam, you're
God bless him. Like that was real clear. Like I understood that thesis.
And that's the honest thesis that a lot of people are applying, and just not with that level of candor, but instead tricking themselves into thinking that they're going to add value along the way that isn't like monetary value.
I mean, I got to tell you, I liked him.
I want an intro. I want an intro. I think Ian wants an intro. Ian wants this kind of let's
you do hardware.
Yeah, exactly, right. I
don't know if he does. Yeah, you know who I'm talking about, though.
Well, but we've seen also the polar opposite. I mean, literally had a VC say, "Look, boy, like I love the fact that this is technically de-risked. We don't see market risk. You don't see team risk. Honestly, the thing we're most concerned about Oxide is capital risk." And I'm like, "You're wait a minute. You're the venture cap. What? Wait a minute. You're the capital. You're the capital.
That's fix that risk.
Fix that risk. That's the one you control." So I mean, kind of at the opposite end, it can be very frustrating. But Ian, I mean, that step function, I think, gives rise to like some weirdness in terms of the way these things are funded, especially early, because it does require more diligence, more conviction early on, because you've got to be and more patience.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's, where I'm maybe a little more cynical is I don't think that I'm equipped as well as, let's say, Seth and his partners at Eclipse to come in and really figure out what the market wants, what they're going to pay, how much. I want there to be basically no market risk. Almost everything I invest in today falls into one of two categories. Either you're making a commodity cheaper and usually greener, or you're improving the standard of care. Like, I know if you do one of those two things, you can sell it. Like, I want the question to be, do you want cancer or not? Would you like to pay double or half for your, energy or commodities or whatever it is? Like, I want to know that it is very clear on the other side of the technical risk, the market is defined, rather than things where like you have to make a couple jumps or you have to know the market better, because I feel like I often don't with the breadth of industry that we invest in.
Yeah, and so Ian, on that note, I've got kind of a stage specific question for you, because you're not the only one. Root Ventures, there are a couple of these. You do seed stage hard tech which is pretty interesting to me, because it's like the actual dollar figures. I mean, they are traditional kind of seed rounds, and Oxide was unusual because we had a large MVP.
Yeah, well, traditional seed rounds, which today get called pre-seed, but
okay, but we're going to stop it at pre-seed, right? We're not going to allow pre-seed. Is that right? Are we all going to kind of hold the line on
that?
Hell no. There's definitely going to be a
you can proceed pre-seed.
Like a femto seed, yeah.
Femto seed, yeah. It's like where does it end?
I did recently hear a pitch for a post pre-seed.
Oh my god. Did you? I mean, how do you? I mean, and do you have to assume that, like, look, I assume you, entrepreneur, did not invent this term. I assume. I hope. Who taught you that?
Let's just say, first money in ish in the range of like, 1 to 5 million. Yes.
Right. And so this is like not a big dollar figure for something that is going to be a huge swing, nuclear power or curing cancer. How do you kind of what's your rubric? Because I mean, part of the reason we didn't do that is because we knew it was going to take a lot more than that to get the MVP to market. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to be sure that we, at the outset, raised something that would allow us to get most of the way to market and get most of the technical, most of it de-risked technically. But for C, that must be a very kind of different calculus. I mean, you must have, what are the milestones that you're looking for a hard tech company at the end of that investment? Because surely it's not revenue.
Well, I can tell you sort of like inception to like seed and series A, and then Seth and SVB actually released something that I think is really helpful here. But oftentimes I'm investing in like two founders, maybe they've recently finished their PhD or something, and they're like, hey, we think we can heat up iron ore much more efficiently such that we could create steel at least cost parity and with a lot less carbon emissions, and maybe we capture the CO2 that we do create, so we get green steel that's cost parity, maybe potentially cheaper down the road. I'm like, okay, great. That plant eventually is going to cost you probably 9 figures to build, But on the first $1 million you raise, let's make sure that you've got that like core, laser or whatever you're using to heat up the thing built, and sort of the experimental risk taken off that. Once we prove that base on which the cost reduction and carbon emissions reduction is coming down, then we can go raise a few million to maybe build like a pilot thing, so you can make some initial steel powder or something that you can not necessarily steal or sell, but you can put in front of a customer and get them to say, yep, this is the stuff we're looking for. If it's X price, then we'll buy a bunch, and here's a purchase order for it. And then you take that purchase order and you go out and you raise a Series A to hopefully build your first plant. I because we're relatively small investors, I do have some tolerances, an upper bound for how much capital is required before you can get meaningful revenue. For me, is sort of in the like $50 to $100 million range.
Okay. Yeah.
But I've seen that done enough that I'm comfortable taking that kind of risk. And then Series A and beyond, I'd let Seth comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this graph from I love Ian's post. This graph from his post is kind of what inspired me to do the work on our side to kind of write this companion piece alongside SVB. You look at that, once you get over the gap on having a product out there and the revenue opportunity, it's true. It can be massive. The metrics around these businesses can be fantastic in terms of the size of the opportunity, the net revenue retention, the lifetime value of the solution in the market, all this kind of stuff. But what inspired me to write this piece was, hey, how do entrepreneurs that are building in these categories understand if they're on the right track ahead of having commercial capability or a product in market? And so, we think that we're okay at underwriting those types of companies, and think we have a framework for how to go do that in a cogent manner. And so this is what we tried to put together and put out to the ecosystem. I think the ecosystem in many ways is devoid of that type of framework, because one of the more common questions I get from entrepreneurs is, hey, what do you think, my milestones need to look like, right? What do you think I need to hit in order to unlock a seed or a Series A or a Series B or Series C? And, this piece and this framework that we put together is our attempt at trying to bring that level of clarity.
Yeah, and I loved the rubric, except the part where you want to get the founders out and bring in professional management. I swear that was on there somewhere. I just I'm gonna look past that one.
It certainly wasn't, but
okay, all right. Oof, maybe I've been I'm twitchy. I too twitchy. But can you talk a little bit about the rubric? Because I actually really like that rubric a lot.
It's I don't think it's like a clear cut and prescriptive as your rule of 40 or your growth rate, and frankly a lot of the commercial metrics apply to these businesses as well. But I kind of think it across like 3 different vertices, right? Proof of concept, proof of demonstration, proof of value, and then kind of the core structural components of the organization encapsulated within milestones related to team and product and market, your understanding of the market. And so I won't go hit all the bullet points, right? I think it's there for anybody who's curious to go look at. But proof of concept and proof of demonstration is very much around, hey, we built something, it works in its totality. It may not work at the performance level or the throughput level. It may not have the costs that we ultimately want to have. We may not have as many systems, or the volume might not be there from a deployment perspective, but we got happy customers. They're referenceable. And we've got the beginnings of a team that's been able to build it, or market it, sell it, deploy it, engineer it, et cetera. And we're headed in the right direction. And so, again, I won't get into all these things, but it's there for anybody who wants to go check it out.
Well, and that's valuable because so proof of concept, proof of demonstration, proof of value. Am I getting the ordering correct? And so, Ian, you're going to be coming in that kind of proof of concept or that earliest bits of turning this. Almost, it sounds like you're turning this to a certain degree from science into engineering in those earliest stages. Is that a fair?
Definitely.
Okay. And then I also gather. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I was saying, and Eclipse does as well, and we co-invest with Ian often, as well as taking some of these larger capital required swings a la Oxide.
Well, so the other thing that I think that I admire about both of you, and indeed all the hard tech VCs that I've encountered, is there's some common traits, especially around curiosity, and I think it's a bit of a myth that everyone is curious. And yes, there are plenty of very curious people, but there are also people who are kind of incurious. And you both, I mean, Ethan, clearly, like, curiosity is a very important part of your own thesis, because you've investigated a bunch of these things, such that if someone coming to you talking about nuclear power or talking to you about some of these domains, you're like, okay, actually, I've already investigated some of these things. I know some of these things, and I'm curious to learn more. I mean, is that what you see as well in terms of your fellow hard tech investors?
Yeah, and I'm probably, because we do bio, probably a little broader than some of our peers, but yeah, I am. If anyone's familiar with the Enneagram, I am a hard five, which is sort of defined by pathological curiosity. um,
Ah,
so yes,
yeah, I
I would
just
say
love. Yeah, I love pathological curiosity. You're gonna need to give me a moment on that one. I definitely, yeah, right. I feel maybe I've had pathological curiosity. You're beginning to explain some of my frayed relationships in my life, I think.
Yeah, well, go look up the Enneagram.
Yeah, right.
The sort of, and I for people listening that don't know me already, I have a bachelor's in international relations. Like I don't have any technical background. I'm just fascinated by all these different fields, and I tend to it does limit the things that I look at. They're sort of, even within climate tech, aerospace, tech bio, our three focus areas. There are things that I know enough about to ask decent questions, and those that it sort of requires enough work that I'm just saying, like, I'm not going to be the right investor for you. And then a founder, their answer to those initial questions can help guide our diligence to make, we think, an informed decision on the company. So I'm definitely, I love this job because I get to talk to the smartest people in the world and learn from them. But, certainly have bandwidth issues.
Yeah, interesting. And Seth, how about for you? Because it felt like, I'm not sure if this was true or not, but it felt like part of the reason that Eclipse was able to move so quickly and proceed so diligently with respect to Oxide, it felt like you were waiting for Oxide. That someone at the partnership, whether it was you or someone else, is like, I feel like there's a company waiting out here, but maybe not.
100%. And I
Is
think,
that's
like,
interesting. Yeah.
that's that's our only. I mean, everybody's money is green, right? So our only competitive advantage when meeting with wonderful entrepreneurs like you and Steve, is solidarity, right? And the understanding of what you're doing, and the ability to, like, actually genuinely, look at you and say, hey, I think we can help improve your odds of success here. And so we take the thesis development part of our job extremely seriously,
Yeah,
and that
interesting.
means saying no to a lot of areas, right? And so, I was very familiar with what the Dropbox folks did, the
Yeah.
challenge they faced there. We followed Facebook's Open Compute project. We knew Amir, right? And
Yeah, right.
when you guys came in, it was like, we were like, hell yeah, this company has to exist. And I think that's a huge litmus test for us, and has been since the inception of Eclipse. Is like, I only want to work on things that I'm excited to get out of bed and go, really scrap for, right?
Yeah,
And spend the
interesting.
next 10 to 15 years working on. And so there's a lot of great businesses and great people that we pass on because, we don't have the same level of conviction that we think is required to go partner, genuinely with those types of founders.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and certainly, I mean, and I think it does highlight, first of all, that as a hard tech, not all hard tech investors are interested in all hard tech companies, and
No, definitely not.
and you're going to need to. That's why But I've also found, honestly, and I feel this is true. There's an analog here in the actual technology itself. I mean, Adam, I think it's fair to say that these hardware software interface kind of communities tend to be much more supportive than many other kinds of communities I have found. I don't know if you found the same way.
No, absolutely. I think it has been a welcome surprise how friendly and supportive, and how much camaraderie there is kind of in this broader ecosystem.
Right. And I feel like I see the same thing on the capital side, where hard tech VCs are really excited to be like, look, you're not a fit for me, but I want to help you out. I earnestly want to help you out, as opposed to, like, how can I be harmful? It's
Listen,
like, actually,
it takes a village, and there aren't enough of us. I mean, you look at,
they're
like,
not. Yeah.
there's never been a better time to go build these companies, and yet not enough people and investors are saddling up and endeavoring to go build these companies to go solve the hard problems of our era. And the hard problems are out there, right? There's an abundance of problems that exist in our country and in our world that need to be solved. And so, everybody on this space right now is in a privileged position to be sitting here on Twitter talking about these things. And whenever that's why folks like Ian and myself and some of the other groups out there, we work together to try to go help support the entrepreneurs that are building these types of solutions.
Yeah, well, and it's honestly, that has been, I feel like entrepreneurs are often very helpful to entrepreneurs, or we try to be. And many of my fellow entrepreneurs have been super, super helpful. And we try to return in kind. But I do find that like hard tech VCs tend to just be, and I loved your blog entry in particular. It's like, hey, by the way, like, here are 9 of the firms that we look to co-invest with, and I feel like you don't see that all the time. And I feel like that it really genuinely, earnestly helpful, which is great as an entrepreneur.
Well, I have to give a shout out to the firm that focuses on sort of the same areas and is pre-seed, or one of the small handful that we get compared to a lot, are our friends over at 50 years. And Seth and I, when we were raising our latest funds, sometimes LPs would be familiar enough that they'd be like, hey, what do you consider yourself competitive with, or how do you compete with Cantos or 50 years? And Seth and I were like having breakfast together one morning and laughing about this, and he was like, how I've started responding? It's pronounced collaborator.
Right. Huh? Wait,
Like,
what?
we're very rarely in zero sum games. Like, we need more funding for these types of companies. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, a satellite company that we invested in last year, I was introduced to by Seth, and he said, hey, I like these founders. We don't necessarily have a very strong thesis on like this area of orbital infrastructure, but it seems like something you'd like. And he was totally right. Ended up investing, and are in the process of investing more now in their Series A. And as you mentioned, Cantos is not an investor in Oxide. I'm just a fan of what you guys are doing, and have been friends. So no, it definitely is a lot of fun, but I would encourage others to jump in because the water's warm and we need more funding.
We need more fun, and I think you mean that. And Seth, you touched on this earlier. Like, you mean that in the broadest sense. Like, we, humanity, need more funding. I mean, the reality is that venture capital has played a critical role in innovation, commercial innovation, in the latter half of the 20th century and into the 21st century. It's like it plays a pivotal role. We need it, and we need it to step up and actually be through venture capital. It is not like, if you want to, like, if you are interested in a pure financial instrument, this is probably not the right asset class for you. And so Seth, on that note, what do you look for in someone who is like, let's say Eclipse is going to expand, is going to add someone to the team. What do you look for actually in someone who is like, this person's going to have what it takes to be a hard tech venture capitalist?
Well, I think it's public that.
Oh God, he just muted himself right at him.
Sorry. I was.
Oh no, it's like no. My heart races because Twitter Spaces has so many problems.
You're good. No, we're bringing on a new partner at Eclipse. We do it every few years. This guy's name is Charlie Mwangi. He's fantastic. If you haven't met him, you should. I'd be happy to introduce you. He's like a prototypical example of like what we're looking for. He's grew up in Kenya originally. Had a bunch of experience operating through automotive OEMs, Nissan, and I think Toyota and a few other places. Joined Tesla and actually worked for my partner Greg Ryko. So cut his teeth kind of in the epicenter of that crazy time from about 2012 to 2017 or 18. Along the way, was advising startups. Traditionally, companies are building these types of hard tech oriented solutions. Did a tour of duty at Cloud Kitchens, was a part of growing that and scaling that. And more recently was the VP of engineering at Rivian for the last 3 years.
Oh,
So,
wow. What a hire. That's a good get. Jesus.
He's a good guy. But what I like to say about this guy, right, is on his spare time, he likes to, analyze 10Ks and learn about great business models and all this kind of stuff. He's a deeply curious individual, as well as being like a consummate operator who's like battle tested through some really challenging efforts to ship complex products. And so, we want to bring people to Eclipse that have strong opinions on the world, that aren't afraid to operate with conviction, that know what they don't know and are willing to admit what they don't know. But most importantly, have the utmost desire to get on the same side of the table, like I said before, with people that are trying to solve hard, significant problems and dig in deeply to go help them be successful.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you are, part of what you're looking for then, and that's like I said, what a great hire for Eclipse. I hadn't heard about it, but it seems like a perfect add to the team. But someone who, especially at Rivian, but I at a bunch of those stops, but has solved real hard problems. And that's someone as an entrepreneur solving a hard problem, like that kind of voice on the other side of the table is one that you're going to pay really sharp attention to. There's someone who's been there, who's actually dealt with setbacks and disappointment and persisted and so on. That's that experience seems like it's extraordinarily valuable. And certainly we see that where people don't have that experience, they have a hard time understanding what it means. And actually, you know what, honestly, the folks that don't have that experience are actually more afraid than they should be. This is where you get the hardware is hard people, where it's like, if you had more experience in this, you'd be less afraid of it.
And that, like, unless you're trying to do net new invention, right, which kind of like, I'm not smart enough to predict when lightning's going to strike in that area, that like these are solvable problems, right? We can focus with the right people to go solve through a lot of these technical issues, right? I've had a front row seat to the wonderful work that you and your team have done over the last 12 to 18 months. You guys tackled some hairy problems, right? So, and there's going to be more going forward.
Oh, God.
You get the right people around the table that care deeply about what they're doing. And I'm a firm believer in, human ingenuity and great teams coming together to go do things of significance.
And I love that like fundamental optimism. And again, you hit it on your piece that like, I think it is coupled with that curiosity, that optimism that like, and you got to it too, in terms of like taking these big problems, being a force for good, curing literal cancer. I think that is because I'm so long on humanity, and sometimes it feels like it can be a lonely voice. People get very pessimistic, and it's like we've got great ingenuity. So I think it's great to hear, Seth.
I want to give people some hope that there is light at the end of the financing tunnel. If you manage to de-risk the technology and then prove revenue and positive unit economics, there is capital out there. It's I think the Series A, B, if you don't have meaningful revenue yet, the Series C, it's that range that is the hardest. But we were sort of...
We know, Ian. We know. We're right here.
Well,
I can hear you.
In general terms.
Sorry. Present company excluded.
But, companies that would get, I started investing not too long ago, but the first companies that would get to that Series B, C stage, when they began to have at least firm purchase orders to the tune of 100 million plus, we were having trouble raising from quote unquote West Coast VCs, and then we sort of like start tearing our hair out, and they're like, well, I got this trip to New York planned to visit some customer or whatever. Why don't I try and set up some meetings with Wall Street and see how it goes? And to our surprise, they were like, wait, what the heck is deep tech? I've never heard of that. This is chemicals. This is aerospace. This is, this industry that we've got whole groups that cover. We know how this works. This is great. Let's do it. We'll invest tens, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars. And you're like, wait, what? It's counterintuitive at first that Wall Street understood it better than Sand Hill did, but then you remember that, you have revenue in industrials. They have more experience there than Santel Road does.
Yeah, absolutely, Eddie. And it's so funny you should say this because we have definitely seen the same thing, and even if and we've seen it over and over and over again. And I wonder. So I've got a kind of something I want to bounce off both of you because we have seen it. Steve and I've seen so many times that, and in fact, when we most recently saw it, it's like it's coming from folks that have a that are ultimately like were born on the public equity side. So these were public equity hedge funds, what have you. And they have, as you say, Ian, they've got teams on aerospace. They've got teams on all these dimensions. So when those folks begin to go onto the private side, it's like, yeah, we understand these industries. Like we've got whole folks that work on it. And the questions being asked, the conviction that they have just seems so. Yeah, we've seen the exact same thing. Did you think that having that public equities kind of origin story helps them understand these industries a little bit better?
Once you get to the point where you've got, at least binding purchase orders or revenue.
Totally. I mean, obviously, like once you cross the chasm, but I feel like they are ready for you to cross the chasm. Unlike some Sand Hill folks, like I don't think there is another side of the chasm. Fuck. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they're ready and waiting. I mean, you go talk to. I mean, there are smart people covering these types of categories at Bailey Gifford and Fidelity and Capital Group and these types of areas that they see something that they're interested in. They have the capacity to go write $100 to $500 million kind of like exploration bets, right? In pre-IPO companies that have crossed the chasm. So, and they do deep work and they're well informed and they take a 20-year view and they're very partnership oriented. So the capital's out there for sure. And I would say there's capital from seed to Series C. Certainly from us, from your friends, from your neighborhood friendly VCs over here at Eclipse, right. but also from other folks as well. And so I think what Ian and I are really trying to do with some of these posts we're putting out is like help bring more clarity and more focus to what's required so that entrepreneurs in these spaces can use their capital efficiently, not overly dilute themselves, and get across that chasm in an expeditious manner.
Yeah, well, and it's Seth, again, the piece I thought was great. Ian, I loved your piece as well. Just terrific to read. I think it's inspiring for hard tech entrepreneurs to know that there absolutely are venture capitalists, and they're going to ask you tough questions. It doesn't mean that, like, again, not every there are plenty of science projects out there that are probably not venture businesses, but I think it's really, really helpful for folks to know that these firms very much do exist. And I love your disposition of like, hey, we want more people to invest in the sector. Like on the one hand, I love you. You're just like, oh, look, I'm willing to I like being contrarian and all, but like I could use some company over here actually.
Totally.
Which is great. So we try to keep these to about an hour. I'm not sure if other folks want to jump in with questions for this crew. I mean, obviously you've got two terrific venture capitalists here, but at albeit at slightly different stages, but who love to co-invest. But this is, it's honestly been great to have you both here. So I don't know, Seth, have you any closing thoughts from you or from Ian? Or no, Adam, you want to jump in here? Yeah.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate what you guys do with this space, and anybody ever wants to chat, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, and I would say that also, if I can just give a plug for both Eclipse and Cantos have podcasts that, like, I actually love them both. I know that I love these because you're talking to your portfolio companies. And I mean, obviously we view Cerebra, Seth, as kind of a sibling company in the Eclipse portfolio. There's a great episode that you all have talking to Andrew Feldman that I loved. Very inspiring stuff. I know you've got a bunch on that series. I would encourage, Seth, I hope you guys are going to keep making those. Ian, I hope you're going to continue doing your podcasts because I know that there are listeners out there that really enjoy them, entrepreneurs that are inspired by them. Ian, I loved the one on Dusty Robotics I listened to recently. I thought that was super interesting.
Oh, it's great. Tessa's amazing. I strongly recommend any hardware founders to listen to that interview.
Yeah, I thought, and Adam, I don't know. I mean, Adam, I can't have you. I don't know if you've
no. I mean, yeah. I'm rapidly subscribing right now.
Right.
There's this industrial evolution, Eclipse Ventures podcast. Ours is Near Frontier. You can go to nearfrontier.com.
And I just, like I said, I hope that you continue to make them, because I know that like the listenership for this doesn't always feel large, but it's important. And I think those are the kinds of things, that's the kind of content that people, it's so valuable to hear from hard tech investors and hard tech entrepreneurs. So thank you for that, Seth. Thanks for the content. I'm looking forward to seeing it's the first of a series, apparently. I can't wait to see the rest. So
yeah. I mean, but I should say, like, we're trying to bring a little bit more, structural operational thinking to kind of this series. We're calling it the Industrial Tech Tactics series, and there's a bunch of stuff on the horizon that you should keep an eye out for.
Awesome, can't wait. Ian, Seth, thank you both so much for being here. This has been a really fun conversation, and hopefully the first of a couple. It'll be great. Let's go get a bunch more hard tech VCs out here, and this is an asset class that we all think that more people should be investing in. So,
amen.
All right, thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks.
Bye, guys. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, all.